for our September the 15th virtual working session. And just a second, continue. Before we start the session, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to cover. Number one of which, if you would like to make public comment during this meeting, we will prompt you at the appropriate time in the agenda to virtually raise your hand. If you are viewing the meeting on your computer, first make sure to click Join Audio. You can then raise your hand by clicking the Participants button at the bottom of your screen, and then the Raise Hand button at the bottom right of your screen. If you dialed into the meeting from your touchtone phone, you can virtually raise your hand by dialing *9. Once we get to the public comment section on the agenda, we will unmute participants with raised hands one at a time. The chat feature on this Zoom meeting is available only as a technical support for users on their computer or smartphone. If you're experiencing technical issues with audio or video during the meeting, submit a comment in the chat feature and our IT manager will help you troubleshoot. The audio and video of this meeting is being recorded. I'll repeat that. The audio and video of this meeting is being recorded. A link to the video will be posted to WC Roads in the coming days. Today's meeting agenda is posted on wcroads.org, and there is a link available in the chat if you are joining us from your computer. I will now call the meeting to order. And we will start with a roll call of attendance. Currently speaking is the board chair, Doug Fuller. Vice Chair, Barb Fuller.
Present.
Member Gloria Yamas.
Present.
Member Joanne McCullum.
Present.
Managing Director Cheryl Siddell.
Present.
County Highway Engineer Matt McDonnell.
Present.
Director of Operations Jim Harmon.
Present.
Director of Finance and IT Dan Ackerman.
Here.
Thank you. We will now we have arrived at public comment. If you would like to make a comment, this is your time to virtually raise your hand. If you are viewing the meeting on your computer, first make sure to click Join Audio. You can then raise your hand by clicking the Participants button at the bottom of your screen, and then the Raise Hand button at the bottom right of your screen. If you dialed into the meeting from your touchtone phone, you can raise your hand virtually by dialing *9. The meeting host will unmute participants with raised hands one at a time. The host will announce your username or last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak. As with all of our meetings, this is a time to receive comments from the public. This is not intended to be a period for dialogue. Each person will be allocated to address the board. Emily, do we have any people that would like to address us?
This time, Commissioner, we do not have anybody with a raised hand.
Okay. In that case, we will move on to the regular agenda. Cheryl, would you like to take over at this point?
Sure. The first thing that we have on our agenda is our job shadowing program, and Nicole is going to share a little bit of information about that. But I am actually very excited about this program because this is one of those ideas that actually came to us from our employees. It came through the employee think tank, which is a group of employees that are sort of representing various parts of our organization. And it really gets to the ability to train and to promote our employees from within, and to give them the opportunity to learn about different positions within our organization, so that you know, they can sort of start to think about some different career paths that may be open to them. And so So this really came from them. They put the program together and they proposed it. So the directors all took a look at it. We were very comfortable with what they had put together, and it's just something that we wanted to share with you before we start actually implementing the program itself. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Nicole.
Thank you. So I do think this would be a living document. This is not something that we have done in the past. I agree with Cheryl. I think it would be new and exciting. What it really provides is the employees to see if a position that they're interested within the organization is suitable for them. That's going to give them the opportunity to help decide, you know, is this a good fit for me? Maybe they're in operations and they're interested in engineering technician. Another position, you know, that we know that we're going to have available later this year would be our signal technician. Cheryl and I were just talking this morning that that could even be a good beginner where somebody can go out for maybe a half a day, 2 days at max, where they're able to see the ins and the outs, what a, you know, a regular day looks like for that employee. I think we all have some ideas, but until you're really walking in those shoes, you may not really realize that. I think we really focus on career development here and promoting internally. That provides that, but I think it also, for the person that is doing the job and having the person shadow, it can really start to develop some leadership skills as well, and give them the opportunity to, you know, have pride in the position that they have and the job that they do, and share their experiences and knowledge. An employee would have to request before they would be able to participate in the program. That would be decided by HR, and we'd work with supervision and management to make sure that works with everybody. We'd of course do it at a convenient time. Hopefully the person that's doing the shadowing would be given like a 360-degree view of the position they're interested in. They will not be working while they're doing that. As far as like, you know, doing that job, it really just is a shadowing for that period of time. I know you guys received this beforehand, and so I just wanted to make myself available to answer any questions that you may have about this initiative.
I have one.
Okay.
Is it been thought about, I guess is the best way to say it, of allowing employees to, over the period of, let's say, a year, I don't care, shadow more than one job?
We hadn't discussed that, but that's a good recommendation. If there should be maybe a limit, or you know, because I don't know what kind of interest. We could have a flood of people that want to do it. So yeah, there's definitely a balance that needs to be had there, Commissioner. So I'm gonna jot a note for myself on that.
Okay, I just wondered, because it gone through my mind. As you say, we encourage people to find their own niche within this organization, and we've been reasonably successful with that over the years. You know, John Posgay comes readily to mind. Finished up, you know, doing a job that he probably did not contemplate when he first hired in. So I would personally, not that I want somebody to be spending half of their time shadowing, but you know, my own thought would be, if somebody actually has an interest in signal tucking or sign installation, for example, maybe that would be, again, over time, something that the supervisors involved could work out. I raised the question.
I
I
agree.
think we're going to have that balance of, I mean, everybody has a full-time job, so obviously
Right.
we need them to continue to do that. And then what opportunities exist, what would be good days to shadow, because there's certain days that are probably less relevant than others. So we certainly want to make sure that that shadowing experience is good for the person who is, you know, asking for the opportunity to shadow. So, you know, there's going to be all of those components that'll go into it. And then we'll see how much interest we get. If we're having to turn people down because there's been just this, you know, flood of requests, then we'll have to balance that. Versus, like Nicole was saying, we may have situations where we know of an upcoming retirement where we almost want to encourage it, so that if people are going to potentially bid into that job, they're going in with their eyes wide open, and it would be a successful, you know, them bidding. And then some of these jobs, like for example, the signal technician, there's quite a bit of training that's involved on behalf of the employees. So at least at that point, they know when they put their bid in what they're getting themselves into as well. So I think that there's going to be a lot of moving parts to this as we're moving forward. But fundamentally, I think it's a very good opportunity for both, like Nicole said, the existing employee, the shadower, as well as the shadower. And then in addition, one thing I just wanted to point out is clearly right now we do have a lot of social distancing protocols that are in place. So we may be a little hampered on the immediate implementation of this program because we take all of that and those are safety concerns. Those are fundamental to what we're doing right now. So it may be a little bit of a slow start up on this particular program just because we have to be careful about that close proximity.
I have a question. Is this limited to existing employees? When I first saw the title, I thought, oh, this is a way for us to introduce folks who might be interested in a position with the Road Commission to become acquainted with it, and us acquainted with them, understanding our desire to diversify our workforce. Promoting from within, I understand the benefits of that. My concern is it becomes an exclusionary pipeline, if you will. So what thoughts do you have about introducing people who are not current employees in this way?
I think initially this program is intended for internal people. It is to fundamentally at existing employees and to provide them opportunities to grow within our organization. So it's aimed right now at existing employees. If we could open it up to the greater public, I guess there would be a lot more that would be involved in making sure that we have appropriate protocols and safety, and a lot of concerns with other people potentially riding in vehicles and being exposed to equipment and hazardous situations that they may or may not be trained in. So if we were to open it to the greater public, I think that there's a lot more thought that would need to be given to how we would actually implement something like that.
And typically a program that becomes open to the public is more working with students, just to see more, not is this the right job? It's usually more career path related, whether it's high school, you know, deciding what they maybe want to attend in college, or even once you're in college. But I'm not really familiar with employers offering job shadowing for just the general public.
I'm thinking of the essential worker GI Bill, if you will, that the governor has announced, and we may have individuals who are actually adult students who might be interested. I'm always trying to be mindful of how do we grow the family, so to speak. Meaning no disrespect to anyone who's currently employed here, or Nicole, how you've been doing your recruitment. But I think it's really easy to say, so, who do you know? And it never goes any further than that. So I would welcome some thoughts from people on how do we utilize this strategy to bring some new folks into the mix.
Right, and we'd be happy to continue to explore those opportunities. I know that Nicole and Alicia have certainly gone to job fairs, have tried to plug in where we can to any of the school districts that we have within Washtenaw County or some of our surrounding areas. And then we've certainly had a lot of the touch a truck type events that we've also attended. Again, trying to sort of, and those are, you know, real quick snippets, but at least an introduction of the type of work that we do. The trucks that we operate are really cool, the different equipment that we have. So, you know, sort of trying to show off, but there certainly is a recruitment component to doing any of that, of those events as well. So if there's opportunities to sort of thread these same things together, we're happy to, you know, have to incorporate as many of those ideas as possible.
And I understand the safety concerns. I should probably do Safety 101 for the road commission as well as a road commissioner to fully appreciate the complexity and the hazards associated with the equipment that's utilized out in the field. Anyway, I didn't want to let the opportunity pass without raising the point that it looks like an opportunity to introduce new people to the organization.
Understood.
I
Any
have,
questions or comments?
so it sounds like an exciting opportunity. I concur with Barb, but for internally, would there be any reason that somebody would be denied? And if they were denied, would they be given the opportunity for later on? So the only reason I could see someone would be denied only because the workload became ridiculous. I do see that implementing this is not going to happen until after COVID, but yeah, so would there be any reason someone would be denied except for workload? And would they be given the opportunity to go at a different time?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head of why they would be denied again, other than the you know, trying to make sure that their jobs being, you know, accomplished, as well as making sure it's a suitable time to do the shadowing. Again, we may take a look at who's requested and how many times, and some of it will be dependent on how popular this program is. But other than that, I can't really think of anything that would be a limiter. I don't know, Nicole, do you have anything that you can think of?
Not immediately.
Very good. That's all I have. Thanks.
All right, well, that was just a piece of information that we wanted to share. We were excited, like I said, again, it's fun when the ideas and the concepts come from our employees to be able to carry them through. So we are really happy with that. So thank you, Nicole, for sharing that.
Thanks.
If we're ready to move on the agenda, I think we're hoping that the bylaws is going to be the next thing on the agenda. Are we ready to move on?
I think so.
Okay.
I have a question. So are you going to be asking the board to take action on this job shadowing concept, or this is informational, or what do you want us to do here?
It was strictly informational, strictly
Okay.
sharing information, sharing something that we thought was exciting that came, you know, through the pipeline, so to speak, with our employees. It's not a policy type action.
Okay.
So we were not expecting approval from the board. We just wanted you to be aware. I know we've talked a lot about different types of recruitment and training and all of the apprenticeship and various things. So we just wanted to share with you. We thought that this was relevant to some of the other conversations that we've been having with respect to staff development. So that's really where that was coming from.
Okay, thanks.
Sure thing.
Earl, if you don't mind my observing under the two things. One is I want to compliment everybody involved in the new concept of our employees bringing good ideas, or ideas, period, forward. This is the beginning of something I hope that has a long and valued lifespan within the commission. And in our consideration of the bylaws, we're considering these for the second time at the working session. in my mind, simply to highlight some changes that various commissioners thought were necessary. So Cheryl, if you could perhaps point out the changes from what was originally proposed, because I don't think there's a necessity to spend even a half an hour on this particular topic. I think we very nearly wore it out 2 weeks ago. So
Agreed.
that in
I'd
mind,
be more than happy to hopefully successfully show my screen here. And as you indicated, the changes have been really minimal at this point. I think that we've had lots of good discussion on them. So let's see. Can you see my screen at this
I've
point?
seen it on page 4.
Pardon?
I said, I think the first change that I saw was on page 4.
Well, actually, under Article 1, there was a couple of places
okay.
where we did reference, and I just went through with a fine tooth comb to make sure that, for example, in Article 1, Section 4, quorum and action, just making sure that we are referencing the appropriate section, which we've moved enough things around that at this point, we want to reference Section 9, which gets into remote participation. So most of the changes were of that nature. So we had Article 1, Section 4, there was one change. Nothing on page 2, unless there's something that we want to discuss. Yes.
No, Cheryl, is there a way for you to expand that, what you have on the screen?
Oh, now you're really gonna see what I can do or not do here.
It was sent as an attachment to this working session agenda, Gloria, if you can pull that up.
Oh, I do have that. Yep, I can look at it here. Thanks.
Okay, and I don't know if that helps either.
It does.
Okay.
Okay, it does.
All right. So again, Article 1 was just the one change. Article 2, no changes. And please stop me if I'm going too fast. Article 3. I'm not seeing any changes until we get to Section 8, which I believe that, Doug, this was your request that instead of, when we're talking about setting the meeting agenda, that instead of the word acquiescence, that we use the word concurrence. And I think that that's consistent with how, at least in my brief tenure, in working with Doug specifically, that's really how we have been developing the agenda.
The term concur is frequently used in many things that the board considers. The term acquiescence is not. So I prefer the term concur if it's all right with the rest of my fellow commissioners.
Fine with me.
Okay. So that was the one change of any substance, so to speak. And then continuing on, let's see, on page, let's see, where are we at? I think we're in Article 3 still, Section 14B, which is the top of page 6. There was a reference to Section 26, which at this point has now become Section 20. And I believe that's the section that describes disorderly conduct. And again, just making sure that we are referencing the appropriate section there.
Thank you.
Again, still on page 6 and Article 3 under Section 19. Again, there was a reference to Section 8, which should be Section 9. And again, that is the remote participation.
I see. Okay.
And that was it. So those were all the changes that were made from the previous set that we had discussed to what you see before you. And then that's actually what I had attached as a draft to for this afternoon for approval, unless there were other changes that were requested.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions about that?
Joanne?
Looks good.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. So the other thing then that we wanted to talk about was then the actual proposed motion. And I can see if I can make this bigger as well. So I believe that the last time there was some discussion about whether or not we would adopt annually, or what the time frame would be, and whether we would actually adopt or review the bylaws. And I did take the liberty of changing this so it is different than what was previously shown to you. At least that last is further resolved, and that was based on several conversations I'd had with a couple of different commissioners. So this is obviously for your discussion, but I did change the word adopt. Instead of taking action annually to adopt, it was to review. And then I think we'd had a couple of different timeframes that were thrown out there, and I had, at least for discussion purposes, put in 3 years, and that would be starting from this December, because we will have our first official organizational meeting per the bylaws would be this coming December.
I'm fine with how you've presented it.
Okay.
So am I.
So am I.
Looks good. Looks good to me.
Okay. Well, that was easy. So that is
Don't
also the rest.
jinx it, Cheryl.
What's that?
Don't jinx it. We're moving really well this morning.
Yeah, no, I'm pleased as punch. So that actually is what is in your board packet, and that makes it easier for Carrie and me. We don't have to change anything.
Yep.
So
Ready to move on to trees?
I think we're ready to move on to trees. So at this point, if I could ask Emily, she was going to run the PowerPoint presentation. I don't want to jinx myself on my success on sharing screens at this point either. All right. So we've been talking about environmental stewardship. And as we talked at the last working session, we had sort of talked about environmental stewardship in the broader context, all the different services and things that we do here at the Road Commission, and so many of them have an environmental component to them, whether it's our routine maintenance and it's the the salt that we're putting down, or whether it's been the various things that we do and stormwater and all the other things. And so as you know, we're constantly balancing the environmental aspects of what we do. Of course, there's always also a fiscal component to it, but it's involved in many of the decisions that we make and the services that we provide here at the Road Commission. So that was sort of a broad overview at the last working session. And so, Emily, if we could go to the next slide, please. Today, we're going to narrow that conversation down to trees. We'd like to talk about some of the existing policies and procedures, practices, sort of a conglomeration of things that we have out there, talk a little bit about what some of our peers are doing, and then help focus that conversation on where we want to go in the future. Next slide, please. So starting with existing policies. We can start right out of the gate with the fact that trees and the issue of trees is complicated. Fundamentally, by law, Tree ownership really does depend upon the type of right-of-way that we have out there. There are some places where we actually own the right-of-way in fee. I mean, it is ours. And in those circumstances, we own not only the right-of-way, we actually own the trees that would be within those rights-of-way. That's if we have the right-of-way in fee. The more common types of rights-of-way that we have is where we have an easement. And so under those circumstances, the property owner owns the underlying property, and we just have rights to it for highway or transportation purposes. And currently by law, the property owner under those circumstances owns the tree. Again, we have our easement for highway purposes, but our rights for the public's interest in safe travel overrides the tree ownership. So ultimately, under those circumstances, which is the most common, road commissions do have the right to remove the tree within the right-of-way if it obstructs the highway or interferes with travel in any way. And again, there's that public safety component there. Now, by law, we are required to provide notification to the property owner if we are going to take the tree down. But that's it. We do have the right to ultimately remove that tree if we find that it, like I said, if it obstructs in any way the highway or interferes with any form of the purpose of travel. Next slide, please. What we also found is that we do not have a specific tree policy that has been approved by our board. We have various documents where we refer to trees, some of which are policy and have been approved by the board. For example, trees are referenced in both our procedures and regulations for permit activities, as well as those for public road development. In both of those instances, we're really talking about more the landscaping components, and that would be where we would allow the trees to be placed. And we're primarily focused on safety. So we're focused on sight distance, making sure that they're not obstructing any visibility with respect to signs or intersection sight distance, and also that they're not interfering with any of the clear zones that we would have. And again, that's specifically related to permit activities or public road development. Next slide, please. Another area where we actually have a policy that's been approved by the board is we do now have a community engagement policy that came about in 2018. That really was the result of a tree-related issues associated with a safety grant that we had for tree removal along North Territorial Road and Mast Road. There was a lot of public outcry for that, based on that project. A lot of people were very upset by what we did, and not only what we were doing, but how we went about doing it. So as a result, the board did approve a policy for community engagement that is really dependent upon the type of project that we're doing. So the larger scale projects would have a fairly robust public engagement component to them, whereas the smaller scale projects or more routine maintenance type activities would have less community engagement. And when we're looking on the size of the projects themselves, tree removal certainly is a component of what we're looking at when we're discussing community engagement. Next slide, please. We do have several procedures that have either been adopted by the board or developed by staff over time. The first one is that we actually have a tree removal procedure that was adopted by the board back in 2002. That applies specifically to living trees. They're defined as anything that is 6 inches or greater in diameter at that point in time. It really is just following state statute and then MDOT guidance with respect to the definitions of trees. It, again, is focused on outlining the steps for notifying property owners about tree removal. And again, that's primarily just following the statute. We also have an internal procedure that was created just this year. We do receive complaints about intersection site distance that are resulting from trees that are interfering with that intersection site distance. So we worked with staff, since those are coming through primarily our C-Click Fix system, exactly who's doing what, and with respect to the review, and then ultimately if there are trees that need to come down, who's performing that work. So that is an internal procedure that was just worked out by staff just this past year. Next slide, please.
Cheryl, would you clarify property owner in the previous slide, please? So is that outside of our right-of-way?
No, this would
Where
be
it says
solely
steps for notifying property owner?
No, this would be solely focused on property owners where we have the easement, but property owners typically own to the center of the roadway. And then the tree would be within the road right of way. So it would be within the easement that we would have. So again, the property owner owns the underlying property. We have an easement, and most of the time it's that we have that 66-foot right of way, or for most properties it's 33 feet from the, we say the center of the road, but it's, hoping that road's on center. But so essentially for most properties, we'd have a 33-foot easement, and then the tree would be within that easement. That's the area that we would be talking about, where we would have rights to the tree, even though the tree's not ours, it really belongs to that property owner. And that's where that public safety, we have that right under the guise of public safety to be able to take that tree down. We just have to provide notification to that property owner. So in that case, the property owner is the property owner of the underlying property where we have the highway easement. Does that make sense?
Yes. Do we have are there any right-of-ways that we own?
Yes.
Or there are?
There are places where we own it. We own it outright. And in that case, we own the trees as well.
Okay.
So we don't have to notify anybody because we would be the property owner.
Okay.
It's complicated, Barb. And
Okay. You triggered a question that I hadn't thought of before. Easement versus ownership in fee simple, and what do we have and what don't we? Okay.
Right. I mean, and that is something that needs to be determined right out of the gate, because that's fundamental to how we go about doing this.
And how does the property owner know? Would I have to look at my property deed, to know whether there's an easement or not?
Correct.
I mean, okay. I want to belabor it. I was just.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, and that's a good case of a lot of property owners don't know. Right. And a lot of what is our highway easement, we have to be respectful of the fact is frequently their front yard. So, and so they're not thinking about the fact that we have that easement there and who's owns, what. And so that's where, trying to be respectful, that we need to understand that part of it for us is also educating them on what we have and that we have these rights, because a lot of property owners aren't even necessarily aware of that.
I'm just thinking back to all the ash trees that people are saying, this is going to come down and it's going to be dangerous. And we say, well, but that's not, we don't own that tree. It's not, we've been advised that we don't mess with those things. So that's the confusion that I have. When is it our responsibility within the right of way, but not if we have an easement, don't own it, right? So
That is where it is very, like I said, right out of the gate, it's complicated.
Okay.
And then depending
Okay.
on what the situation is, depends on whether or not, frankly, the property owner wants the tree or doesn't want the tree. And then
Right.
whose responsibility is it going to be to take the tree down? If it's a dead tree, it's a different story because that's a very
Right.
common request for us to remove the dead tree, not the live tree. So and that's
Right.
where,
Right.
you know, it's again, inherently complicated, and it really depends on the situation and what it is that the property owner or the road commission wants done.
Okay.
But good questions, because I mean, this whole thing starts with what type of, is it an easement or do we own it in fee? So it really does start with whose tree is it? And that's right out of the gate, not an easy question to answer.
Okay.
I guess, Cheryl, those are, you and I did this, and that is kind of like you said, the same question that I have, you know, as Commissioner Barba is Fuller is, it's determined that it's an unsafe tree, just who ends up being responsible for taking down the tree.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And it also matters whether it's a living or a dead tree, obviously, right? We
Well,
don't
I
deal
mean,
with dead
essentially,
trees unless they fall into
usually
the
when-
road.
yeah, usually when it's live or dead, it gets to whether who wants the tree taken down is really normally where that's coming from. Again, if it's a dead tree that's in conflict with something that we need to do, we still would have the right to take the tree down, and we may need to notify the property owner. Usually the property owner, and again, I'm talking in generalities here, usually the property owner under those circumstances is happy that we're taking the tree down because that's an expense that the property owner doesn't have to incur. When it's a live tree, normally the property owner wants the tree. Although there are times when the property owner actually doesn't want the tree and is happy
Right.
with taking the tree down as well.
Yeah.
Have I made it confusing enough?
I think I read it in the paperwork that you sent me. I read further, and I did see where if the tree falls into the road, it doesn't matter whose tree it is, it's still our responsibility to remove it from the road, correct? Okay.
That is correct.
To the edge of the traveling way though, right? We don't clear the entire right of way. If a tree falls into the road, we only deal with what's on the place where people drive, right?
Our primary concern is going to be the traveled way. There is, of course, drainage facilities that are typically alongside the roadway as well. So if it's impeding drainage or causing a problem in that manner, we may also do additional removal. It's really going to depend upon the circumstance. But the primary focus is going to be that clearing the traveled part of the roadway. Any other questions on that? I'm sure there'll be more as we keep going along. All right, Emily, if you want to keep going. All right, so obviously taking trees down has been potentially controversial for a very long time. And so we are trying to take a look back at some of the things that are sort of the common things that we hear from the public when they're not happy with what it is that we're doing. And the first one is that we're destroying natural resources and habitats, and we haven't even provided a good reason of why we're doing it. That there's lots of fixed objects that are in the right of way. Why are you picking on this poor tree? They don't understand fundamentally what we're trying to accomplish. Sometimes it's because we haven't done a good job of education, of educating the public on what it is that we're doing. Maybe they don't understand fundamentally what the project is or what it is that's coming along. So that's been one of the criticisms, that we just randomly are taking down trees. Another criticism has been that we don't explore all of our options before we do tree removal. We just immediately go to that. We haven't seen if we could design our way out of it, or if there's other things that we could do to work and keep that tree up, that the first thing we do is say, oop, just take the tree down. Another criticism has been that a lot of what I've been discussing has been tree removal, but we also do a fair amount of tree trimming as well. And that some of the work that we're doing is causing damage. One of the things that we hear about quite frequently right now is the concern over oak wilt, and that we are not, taking appropriate action to stop the spread of oak wilt disease. So those are some pretty common things that we hear. Next slide, please. In addition, we've heard a lot of concerns with respect to lack of transparency and notification. Like I said earlier, really coming out of that 2018 project, we did develop the community engagement policy. So I'd like to think that the lack of transparency is less, although we try to communicate as much as we can the different projects that we have coming, but obviously we don't necessarily knock on every door. So there is some concern there that of what we're doing, that we're doing it in secrecy. And again, the notification, and by law, we are required to work with the property owners, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're engaging the broader public on every tree that we're taking down, and notifying everybody of every tree that is coming down. But certainly by law, we are required to work with that property owner. We've also heard some what we've labeled almost as conspiracy theories that are out there, and I would like to emphatically state that these are untrue. The road commission contractors that somehow were profiting off of wood sales, I can assure you that no one within the road commission, its entity, any of our contractors has ever made any penny off of wood sales associated with this. We do not take them down in order to make money. In fact, taking trees down is expensive. We also are not proponents per se of 5G. We are not, do not have projects that are specifically with the emphasis of trying to take trees down in order to facilitate 5G service throughout the county. That none of that is true, but we have certainly heard those allegations. Next slide, please.
Cheryl, I have a question.
Sure.
On notification. If we're doing work on behalf of a township comes to us and says, we want you to do this road project, and we enter into an agreement to do what they've asked us to do, whose responsibility is it for notification with respect to the project?
We would handle the notification. Ultimately, it's a road project, so we would be handling the notification.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
Trinkley Road comes readily to mind.
Yes, Trinkley Road is a good example of we work in partnership with the townships, and we've got some information on this coming up, but they are by far the biggest partners that we have out there are the 20 townships. And so there are projects that they ask us to do that involve tree removal. And so we follow all of our same protocols. Like I said, it's sort of a conglomeration of whether it's procedures, policies, laws, and all of that we're dealing with right now, but we follow our normal protocols to do any of those projects, whether they're funded by the road commission or they're funded by a township. Next slide, please, Emily. So current practices. So fundamentally, why do we remove trees? Really, it falls into sort of three areas. Safety being sort of the primary reason of why we would remove trees. They often are in conflict with many of our road improvements. And then we also know that quite frequently they also become a maintenance issue. So those are the times that the road commission would be removing trees. Again, whether they be our projects or those that would be funded by the townships. We do have plenty of times when third parties are removing trees, and that would be done under permit. Next slide, please. So safety. Unfortunately, these types of headlines are far too common. People leave the roadway for whatever reason that might be, and we have lots of trees that are directly adjacent to the road in Washtenaw County. So hitting a tree is not an uncommon occurrence here. And unfortunately, most of the time in those circumstances, the tree wins. Next slide, please. Started to pull some data with respect to actually crash statistics. And so we know both from just a statistical perspective and from firsthand knowledge that trees and utility poles can be deadly. On the national perspective, and I like the way that this slide sort of presents that, 14% of fatal crashes involve hitting a roadside tree or a utility pole. And what they're first looking at when they look at these numbers here is they're looking at fatal crashes. If you look at all the fatal crashes nationwide, over half of them involve roadway departure. And that, for whatever reason, the vehicle is leaving the roadway, whether it's inattentive of the driver, they're swerving, whatever it might be, the vehicle is leaving the roadway, 56% of the time. Of those, when they leave the roadway, 40% of those fatal crashes involve the vehicle hitting a fixed object. And when they hit a fixed object, the vast majority of the time, 63% of the time, that fixed object is a tree or a pole. And we know in Washtenaw County that our numbers are very similar to that. And I know Brent and Elena were certainly looking through the numbers and finding that they mirror this pretty similarly. And one thing that we do in traffic and safety is we go out and we investigate all fatal and serious injury crashes in Washtenaw County. And so anyone, myself included, who has worked in traffic and safety can tell you firsthand that they've been out on these crashes and they've seen, and it doesn't take a very big tree for it to result in a fatal crash like this. Next slide, please. Another area of why we would take trees down is for road improvements. And we've listed a bunch of different types of work that we do here, but anytime that we're working outside of the existing footprint of the roadway, and I mean just the roadway itself, again, in Washtenaw County, we have a lot of trees, so it is pretty common circumstance that we are going to be getting into tree removal as soon as we're doing anything that's outside of that really existing traveled portion of the roadway. If we get into any form of a widening, whether it be for the roadway itself, it's not too often that we're actually adding lanes to roadways these days, but it is fairly common that we're actually asked to put a paved shoulder or some form of a bike lane on a roadway. That would certainly typically result in pushing that road out, pushing the ditches out, and that would involve some form of tree removal. Many of our intersection projects, again, we're widening those out, whether they be for turn lanes at a traffic signal or we're looking at a roundabout. Again, we're getting outside of that existing footprint. Again, we would more than likely be into tree removal. When we're paving a gravel road, we're usually having to bring it up to whatever the current standard is for that type of a roadway. Again, establishing ditches and all of that, that would be removing trees. And anytime we'd be smoothing out a curve, flattening out a curve, or very frequently with our bridge and culvert replacements, we're sort of reestablishing any of those areas, whether it be the water course or it be the roadway in that vicinity. Again, those would all result in tree removal. And we talked about some of our partners. You know, Commissioner Fuller had inquired, it doesn't matter whether those are coming from road commission staff, whether it be for state, federal funds, or if we happen to have an MTF funded project. Same with if we have a township project, they're typically going to fall into one of these categories as well. And so again, there may be tree removal associated with that. Another entity that we work quite frequently with is Washtenaw County Parks, and actually some of our townships as well. They are big proponents of non-motorized facilities and a lot of the trails that are going in. A lot of them are they will apply for the TAP grants, the Transportation Alternative Program grants, and those particular funds have to come through the Road Commission as the Act 51 entity for whether it's county parks or the townships. And so again, we would be a partner in those projects. And typically when they're off the roadway, again, you're talking about a significant amount of tree removal associated with those projects. Next slide, please. As far as maintenance goes, Again, it's quite common for us to be into tree removal. In order to preserve the road system that we have in place, we absolutely have to have a successful drainage system, whether that be the ditches and the culverts that are in the more rural areas, or it be the storm sewer. We need to have that road drained properly, and that unfortunately the trees are quite frequently in the same location as where we want that ditch or those culverts and storm sewer to be. Another thing that we need to do in order to preserve, and we're spending a lot of money right now, whether it be on pavement preservation, whether we're actually paving the road or we're doing the chip seal and the fog sealing, the activities that we've been doing, or if we're talking about a gravel road improvement where we're coming in and we're doing gravel and limestone, significant improvements along those roadways. One of the best things that we can do is really open up that roadway so that the air and the sunshine can get in. That is going to help dry out those roadways. It's going to help make sure that if we're trying to do winter maintenance, that the sun is getting in, and that's going to help remove the ice and the snow from the roadway as much as the salt is going to do so. Again, the air getting in there and being able to dry that out, whether it be the pavement or whether it be a gravel road surface, that is going to preserve all that investment that we've been putting in over the last few years, trying to bring our system up into a good and fair condition. We spend a fair amount of resource on storm cleanup. I know that Jim has started to indicate some of our after-hour call-ins. Those quite frequently are trees that are coming down, whether it be in the wintertime, like the picture we have here, or whether it be during the summer and we're having any of the high winds that would be coming through. We've certainly seen examples like the Dexter tornado, where that was substantial tree issues that came through. But a lot of times when we have storms that are coming through, the tree cleanup is a frequent occurrence that for us to have to take care of coming through after a storm. In addition, we've also talked about the fact that we have quite a few requests for the removal of dead and dying trees. Those are normally coming in through our C-Click Fix system. And since 2016, I believe we've had over 1,200 requests for tree removal. And again, that's the property owner coming in those cases to us and asking for that dead or dying tree to be removed from the road right of way. Next slide, please. And then we do have third parties that come in and do tree removal. That's typically done under permit. DTE and Consumers Energy being the two big utilities that we have whenever they have the overline electrical systems that are in place. It is important for them for continuity, for them to keep those lines clear. So they do a lot of extensive tree removal for their facilities. Anytime a property owner is wanting to access the road right of way, whether we are issuing a driveway site distance permit or it would be a private development, commercial type development that would be coming in, we would be checking site distance, and there may be tree removal that would be required as part of them gaining access and us ultimately issuing that permit. So those are examples where trees would be removed by a third party. Next slide, please. So as we said earlier, we have quite a few people that have been unhappy when you want to take trees down. And one of the allegations is that we're quick to say, take the tree down, and we haven't looked at all the other alternatives that are out there. Frequently what we hear is that, well, you've got other alternatives that you could do as opposed to taking the trees down. You could put guardrail in front of the tree, and then you could save the tree. Unfortunately, guardrail is not a good alternative to try to protect against a tree. Guardrail itself is a hazard, so striking a guardrail is not a good thing, just like striking a tree is not a good thing. Guardrail, in order to function correctly, you do have to have a certain amount of room behind the guardrail potentially. So that means that now the guardrail inherently has to be even closer to the road than the tree is going to be. And one of the ways that guardrail actually functions is that it the vehicle hits it and then it redirects the vehicle back into the road. Well, that often, not only are they redirected back onto the road, there's a likelihood that they could potentially cross the center line. So now, instead of going off the road, and if you had a nice clear area where they could recover and gradually come back onto the roadway, they've hit the guardrail and they've come back onto the roadway, and they may or may not encounter another vehicle, which just poses yet another set of problems. So guardrail is not intended to protect against something like a tree, and guardrail itself, you have to be very careful about where you put it in, because it can have safety implications in and of itself. The next two, reducing the speed limit and more enforcement, really sort of go hand in hand. A lot of times we hear, well, part of the problem is that people are traveling too fast. And if they would just slow down, then you wouldn't have the issues. They wouldn't be going off the roadway, and then they wouldn't be hitting the tree. Speed limits is something that by law we are required to do jointly with Michigan State Police. One of the things that they look at in setting a speed limit is what they call the 85th percentile speed. So they're really looking at the prevailing speeds because most people are reasonable drivers, and most people are inherently driving at what would be a safe and reasonable speed. And so that is what they're going to be looking at on setting the speed limit. When you're trying to artificially reduce the speed limit because of something like you don't want them, the thought that they're going too fast and they might leave the roadway, your likelihood of compliance, first of all, is very low. And one of the only ways you would potentially get compliance is by having really strict enforcement on that speed limit. And the resources are not there to have that type of enforcement. That pretty much means that you need to have a local law enforcement or a sheriff's deputy there full time. And most communities can tell you that they don't have the resource for that. And without that type of enforcement, you're not going to have compliance with a reduced speed limit, and you're not going to inherently be fixing the problem anyways. So that really is not an answer to tree removal, which again is getting to having that safe area for recovery. We've had requests for rumble strips. We are actually big proponents of rumble strips. We believe that they really are a good solution, whether they're center line or they're on the edge of the roadway. But rumble strips too, you have to be careful about where you put them in. There is a noise factor, so if you are in any form of a residential area or even areas where people live nearby, you have to offset the thought that somebody may leave the roadway, and then versus the noise that is then created for those adjacent property owners. When you have rumble strips along the shoulder, also we don't have wide shoulders on many of our roads, and if you put a rumble strip there, that area, very limited area for those that are cycling or using it for a non-motorized purpose, if you put a rumble strip in there, that's normally not a fan favorite for anybody that might be on a bike. So again, you need to balance all of those, and not that, again, would not be an answer to having that clear area for recovery. Finally, roadway lighting is another one that we've had requests for. And inherently, what we're talking about more often than not is a rural setting. So it's sort of incompatible with that. I know that we also have concerns with respect to light pollution. So if you start talking about putting excessive lights in, now you've got, the offsetting concern of light pollution. In addition, anything with respect to lighting, we are typically looking to the townships to fund anyways. So that would be a cost that then would be passed on potentially to someplace else. And where you or how you would do the lighting may very well create the same issue that we have with the tree, because if you're talking about potentially putting a utility pole in, now you've got the same issue that you may have with respect to the tree, if you're looking at it from a safety component. So I just wanted to run through some of those, because those are some of the more common alternatives that we hear from the public, that, well, if you just did any of these things, you wouldn't have to take the tree down. Are there any questions on any of that? All right, next slide, please. So current practices. So when do we actually plant trees? So there are times when we actually do either allow them to go in, or we would plant them ourselves. With subdivision development, which is fairly limited in these days, but still on a low-speed road where we have, especially if we have curb and gutter, so you have a slight barrier there, that may be an appropriate place to put trees. And we do know that, again, with many of our communities, they're looking for those streetscape type trees, and we do permit them under those circumstances, assuming, of course, that they're not interfering with intersection sight distance or visibility on something like a stop sign. We also would potentially work with a township or another entity such as the SIO DDA. When Jackson Boulevard was constructed, we did work with the DDA to find areas where landscaping, including trees, would be appropriate. Again, making sure it wasn't in any of the sight triangles for any of the crossovers or in any areas where they would be inherently a safety object, but they were able to come up with a landscape plan where that made sense, and they were able to put, again, all kinds of landscaping, including trees, in under those circumstances. We also do allow trees to be planted under permit. Anyone can come in and apply for a permit to plant a tree. I think that we've sort of talked about all the concerns and sort of the limited areas of where we may allow that to be planted, but that is a permissible activity under our permits. Next slide, please. Yes.
As far as getting a permit to plant a tree, they would go to the road commission, not to their township or city?
If they were going to put it into the road right of way, they would need to have a permit from us. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Next slide, please. We also took a look at what our peers are doing with respect to trees. Next slide, please. So the first thing we did is we did look at other road commissions. And now when we're talking about trees, we're talking about sort of that broader scope, trees in general, and then also tree replacement, which has been one of the topics that has also been brought to our attention to see if we could address. And what we found was that no Michigan Road Commission that we were aware of has a tree replacement policy. If they did have a tree policy, it was typically a tree removal policy procedure that would be similar to what we have in place. And again, that's primarily mirroring Michigan law. And there are a handful of road commissions that do allow others to replant in the right of way. Again, that would be typically subject to permit, similar to what we would allow. Next slide, please. So we did look within Washtenaw County at some of the cities and townships in the area. And did they have anything with respect to tree removal or tree replacement? And what we found was that the cities and some of the townships do have some regulations in place. What they're primarily focused on is land development. And so, for instance, if you're clearing an area and you take down a certain number of trees, or you add up the caliper of the trees that are removed, there would be a requirement that there be a certain percentage or certain number that would be, and it's usually a ratio, that would be replaced on site due to the activities that were taking place. But those rules and regulations are really focused on development, and not to the work being done by the city or by the township itself. The city of Ann Arbor and then Ypsilanti, Scioto, and Ann Arbor townships all have landmark or historic tree designations, but those don't really have a correlation to any type of restrictions on removal or replacement themselves. Next slide, please. So I just wanted all that background information, because there's a lot of information that is out there, like I said, sort of either in a variety of sources or sort of in a variety of places within our own organization. So we're trying to get a sense of where we want to go. So next slide, please. So obviously today we wanted to make sure that we went through sort of this conglomeration of information with you. We do have Alan Philbrick waiting for us right now. There's some additional information that we would like to talk about with respect to what can or cannot be done with some of the different funding sources that we have available. But where we would ultimately like to go is based on this information and the discussion that we have, staff would like to bring forth sort of a broad tree policy back to this board for review. Hopefully at the October 20th working session, and the intent would be that it would be a broad tree policy. And then we could talk not only about general guidance, but then we can also talk about potential if we've got, a removal component, would there be a replacement component, what, and be able to have an overriding or a broader policy that addresses all the different components of trees with respect to the Washtenaw County Road Commission. And once we had a draft policy that the board was comfortable with, we do believe with the amount of interest in this subject with the residents of Washtenaw County that it would be important to have a public engagement process, and we can certainly talk about that as well further. And with ultimately this board adopting a tree policy, either end of this year or the beginning of next year. So next slide, please. So at this point, I'll ask if you have any questions. All right, very quiet.
Cheryl, I
Yeah.
have a question. That was a wonderfully comprehensive and informative PowerPoint. I don't believe it's been shared with us. Is it going to be available somewhere so I could have it for reference?
We can certainly share the PowerPoint. That's not an issue. We are recording this working session, so this presentation in its entirety will be on our website for anybody to view as well.
Right, but if I don't want to watch an hour's worth or more, is it available to download and look at as a PDF?
Not currently. I can either send it out if you want it, or we can look at if there's an appropriate place to put it on our website as well.
I would appreciate having it. I was trying to follow along and realized very early that the one that I did have wasn't the one you were using. So,
that was the initial first draft.
Right. No, this was great. I just, I can see that I'll have a need and desire to refresh my memory with the content of today's presentation.
Absolutely.
So if you could please send it to me as a PDF, I'd be grateful.
Yep, be more than happy to do that.
I do have another question. I know that our commissioners are also concerned with this and wonder if it's something that we wouldn't send to them for questions or to share, because it's been some of their concerns that around trees or
the PowerPoint itself.
Right. But and just something to consider, not that we necessarily need to do that, and maybe Commissioner Jamnick can speak to that or report that if people are interested. They're not aware. I don't know if they're aware that we have, all of this information for them, if it can be made available to them in an effort to be transparent to them about the issues around the tree, because it is such a contentious and sensitive subject for people that are in Washtenaw County that are especially concerned with the environment and saving trees, and know that we don't take them down unnecessarily, so they can realize and or for their own benefit have information for when their constituents contact them with what they feel is unsensitive or us being insensitive, and or to be able to address those conspiracy theories that kind of like fly around here lately. Well, I'm sure that's old. It just seems like it's grown in nature about how many people think that there's some kind of conspiracy going on.
Right. Well, I guess, I mean, a couple thoughts on that. Initially, that is why we wanted this to be at the working session, so that we were doing this publicly, so that there is the ability to, if you couldn't join today, I guess I'm not sure if the PowerPoint is useful without the dialogue that is going along with it. So I would hope that even though it may be long, that if somebody was truly interested in this subject, that they would view the recording of this working session, because I do think that the questions that have been asked and the dialogue that's gone along with the PowerPoint is important, and it also helps put things in context. I do know that we also have some handouts, and we probably should take a step back and look at them as far as, you know, updating them and having them be fresh, that may be more useful as well, that if somebody just wants a quick, you know, one pager, that we've got something that makes sense that we're handing out. Again, I want people to be informed and educated, and as they're looking through the information and where to go for it.
Thank you.
Your thing.
And Cheryl, you had some very helpful and concise handouts that were shared with us in conjunction with this working session as well. Who owns that tree and roadside tree removal? So there are some references in the can, on the shelf, however you want to put it,
Right.
around this issue.
Right. And I'd like to work with Emily. If that's where we want to go with this, then we can take a look at what would make the most sense and how to have that sort of consolidated, whether it's into one document or if it's a source that you go to and it has a variety of resources that are available. We don't need to recreate the wheel if there's things that are already out there that make sense and that are useful as well. Any other questions? All right, well, I think we're done with at least the staff portion of this. I do know that we have, so I guess, Emily, if you want to stop sharing your screen at this point. And I believe that Alan Philbrick has some additional information that he would like to share with us in closed session.
So that means we need a motion, and I'd like somebody to suggest a motion, because we have two topics that we would like to discuss in closed session. So I'd even,
I moved
go ahead.
Support.
I move that we enter closed session for the purpose of consulting with our attorney regarding tree policies, as well as a property offer from M52 Minerals LLC.
I support.
That's motion and support. Roll call vote is necessary. Commissioner Barb Fuller,
Yes.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas,
Yes.
Commissioner Joanne McCullum,
Yes.
Commissioner Doug Fuller votes yes as well. So we are at this point in closed session. Emily, can you, and unless there is something else that commissioners feel necessary to cover, I would like to adjourn this meeting so we can all get ready for the next meeting.
I move we adjourn.
Support.
Been moved and supported that we adjourn the meeting. Commissioner Barb Fuller,
Yes.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas,
Yes.
Commissioner Joanne McCullum,
Yes.
Commissioner Doug Fuller votes yes as well. We are adjourned, and we'll see you all at 1 o'clock.